The roar of the plane's engine faded into a dull hum as Emily Carter pressed her forehead against the cold window. Far below, the landscape of Sicily stretched out like a painting: vineyards, olive groves, terracotta rooftops, and far in the distance, the towering silhouette of Mount Etna, its summit shrouded in a wisp of smoke. She had seen volcanoes all over the world, but Etna had a strange pull, a living force that both called to her and warned her. Her fingers clenched the worn strap of her duffel bag as she whispered to herself, this wasn't supposed to be a vacation. The baggage carousel creaked, spitting out suitcases under flickering fluorescent lights. She grabbed her single black bag, nodded at the customs officer, and stepped into the blinding Mediterranean sunlight. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The heat wrapped around her like a heavy coat, but it was the silence that struck her more, different from the constant hum of life in San Diego. She climbed into the small rental Fiat, GPS locked on a village called Santa Mina, nestled near the mountain's base. The drive wound through ancient roads, past fields that shimmered under the late afternoon sun. In her pocket, Emily carried an old letter. Yellowed, frayed, and written in her mother's delicate script. It was the only link she had to this village, to her mother's mysterious past, something her mom had never talked about until the final days of her illness. Go, the letter read. Find where I came from. Maybe you'll find yourself, too. Emily didn't believe in closure. Or at least, she didn't think it was real. Her divorce papers were signed only 6 months ago. Her ex-husband had moved on before the ink dried. Grief clung to her like smoke, invisible but choking. She had nothing left to lose. That's what made her dangerous. And what made this trip inevitable. As she reached Santa Mina, the landscape shifted. Old stone houses with red-tiled roofs stood stubbornly against time. Women chatted on balconies. Children kicked balls through narrow streets. And towering over it all was Etna, quiet for now, but ever-present. She checked into a modest guesthouse run by an elderly couple who spoke little English. Her room overlooked the valley. Emily collapsed onto the bed without unpacking. Jet lag tugged at her, but she couldn't sleep. That night, the tremors began. Subtle at first. A glass rattled. The floor creaked. Then silence. She'd experienced quakes before, quick, forgettable, just the earth shrugging off stress. But this one had a different timbre. Something ancient stirred. At sunrise, she ventured out with her field journal and a sense of unease. Her path led to the local research outpost, where she was scheduled to meet Marco Santoro, a volcanologist who had worked on Etna for 15 years. He was already waiting at the trailhead, tall, lean, with weathered skin and sharp eyes that didn't miss a detail. "You're the American geologist?" he asked, not unkindly. "Emily," she said, shaking his hand. "I read your paper on the Chilean lava tubes. Impressive. Thanks. I needed to get away. And, my mother was born here." That last part came out before she intended it to. He didn't press. "We monitor seismic activity from this ridge. The volcano's restless. Local council thinks it's nothing. I think they're wrong." As they hiked, Marco pointed out fumaroles emitting thin trails of sulfur. Birds circled nervously above. The air held a metallic tang. Emily scribbled notes, her instincts twitching. "How long do you think we have?" she asked. Marco paused. "Could be days. Could be hours." That afternoon, as they returned to the village, Emily met Lucia, Marco's cousin and the only remaining link to her mother's side. Lucia embraced her like family. "You look like Rosa," she said, tears in her eyes. They sat at a small kitchen table, sipping strong espresso as Lucia produced an old photo of 2 girls in black and white dresses, one of them unmistakably Emily's mother. "She left after the last eruption. Never came back. Emily stared at the picture. Why didn't she tell me? Lucia smiled sadly. Sometimes the past hurts too much. That night, the village held a festival in the square, music, dancing, wine. Emily watched from the edge, emotions warring inside her. For a moment, she let go. She danced. She laughed. The mask cracked. But beneath it all, the mountain loomed, brooding. Then, the earth groaned. The music stopped. A tremor stronger than before rippled through the square. Glass shattered. Children screamed. Emily's heart stopped. She locked eyes with Marco across the crowd. He was already moving. This is it, he said grimly. Etna's waking up. Sirens pierced the air. Cell service flickered out. Plumes of dark smoke rose in the distance. People scattered. Panic took hold. Emily grabbed her bag and ran to the guest house. Ash began to fall, light at first, like snow, but carrying the weight of dread. She coughed, covering her face. Inside, she threw essentials into a pack: water, flashlight, compass, journal, and the letter. Marco burst through the door. We have to go. Now. They met Lucia outside. My family, she cried. They're up the hill. We'll get them, Marco promised. The three of them sprinted up narrow paths as the first lava glow shimmered on the horizon. Etna had erupted, fully, violently, without warning. Smoke turned the sky a sickly gray. Animals fled. The air grew hotter, thicker. A low rumble never stopped, like the world's heartbeat out of sync. They reached Lucia's family just in time. An elderly couple, frightened but mobile, joined them. Roads were impassable. Ash coated everything. Emily's lungs burned. She realized this wasn't just science anymore. This was survival. As they tried to descend toward a safer area, a second explosion split the air. A shockwave knocked them to their knees. A rain of fiery debris followed. Emily threw herself over Lucia's mother as embers rained down. Marco shouted instructions, his voice lost in the roar. A burning tree blocked the path. They turned, retreating blindly into the smoke. Emily's thoughts blurred. She remembered her mother's voice in the hospital, "You're stronger than you know." It didn't feel that way now. She felt like breaking. But Marco's hand on her shoulder grounded her. "We'll make it," he said. "We have to." They stumbled into an abandoned chapel at the edge of the forest. The old stone building, half swallowed by ivy, offered temporary safety. Inside, it was cool, dark, still. The air smelled of dust and old prayers. Emily collapsed against a wall, heart hammering. Lucia sobbed quietly beside her. The world outside burned. Emily opened her journal with trembling hands. Her notes were smeared. Her future was uncertain. She wasn't sure who she was anymore, a scientist, a daughter, a failure, a fighter. But in that chapel, surrounded by strangers and chaos, one truth rooted itself deep inside her chest. She was alive. And as long as she was alive, she could fight. Outside, Mount Etna roared, indifferent and immortal. The sky turned black as midnight. But inside that chapel, a spark had been lit. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The mountain slept for now, but Emily's mind didn't. In the quiet chapel, lit by the faint orange glow of distant fire, her heartbeat was a drumbeat of fear and memory. Her back pressed against the cool stone wall, her face smudged with ash, her eyes stayed wide open, tracking every flicker of light and shadow. She listened to the soft, uneven breathing of Lucia, her distant cousin, curled up on the floor with her parents, and to Marco, who sat near the doorway with his eyes locked on the darkened woods outside, every muscle in his body wired with tension. Emily clutched her journal to her chest, as if the weight of her field notes could anchor her to something real. Her hands still trembled. Her ears still rang. And all she could think about was her mother. Rosa had been a mystery all her life, elegant, quiet, guarded. She rarely spoke about Italy. When she did, it was in half-thoughts, riddles, unfinished memories that Emily could never piece together. Her mother had left Sicily after the 1983 eruption and never looked back. Emily never understood that choice, until now. Until she had felt the mountain's fury for herself. A volcano wasn't just rock and lava. It was history. It was trauma buried deep. It was grief, pressure, silence, waiting for a crack to explode through. Just like her. That realization sat heavily on her chest. She didn't need the mountain to erupt to feel her world collapsing. Her marriage had already cracked and bled until nothing was left. Kyle had once held her hand and promised forever, but forever was fragile. He couldn't take her silence, her hours in the lab, her obsession with fault lines and ancient cores. He said she loved rocks more than people. He wasn't wrong. When Rosa passed, Emily didn't cry until she was alone on a plane to Rome with her mother's final letter tucked in her coat. Even now, that letter felt radioactive in her pocket. Her mother had written about love and regret, about a place where the earth never slept and neither did the memories. "You are stronger than me," the last line said. But sitting in a crumbling chapel surrounded by smoke and fear, Emily didn't feel strong. She felt shattered. "You should try to sleep," Marco said, his voice low, careful, not to wake the others. "We're safe here. For now." She looked at him. In daylight, Marco had been sharp and quick, filled with the energy of someone who lived on the edge of danger. But in the shadows, she saw his exhaustion, the heaviness under his eyes. "You really think it's safe?" she asked, voice barely audible. He sighed, glancing at the distant glow through the cracked stained glass window. "It's stone. Old. Sacred. Sometimes that's enough." She nodded slowly. The irony of finding refuge in a church when she hadn't set foot in one for over a decade wasn't lost on her. She wasn't religious. Science was her scripture. Data her faith. But in this moment, she prayed silently, not for a miracle, but for time. Time to figure out how everything had come apart. Time to decide who she wanted to be if she got out of this. "How long have you lived here?" she asked, needing to fill the silence with something human. "All my life," Marco replied. "I studied in Naples, but I came back. Couldn't leave. The mountain, it's a part of me." Emily tilted her head. "Why? You risk your life studying it." He gave a half-smile. "Because it reminds me that everything is temporary. You can't lie to a volcano. You can't pretend. It tells the truth, whether you want it or not." She looked down at her hands. "I used to think science was clean. Orderly. Equations and evidence. But being here, it's messy. Emotional. It always has been," he said. "You just didn't want to see it." That stung. Not because it was rude, but because it was true. For years she'd buried emotion beneath research papers and fieldwork. She thought if she controlled everything on the outside, nothing could break her on the inside. But now, in the face of natural disaster and buried family secrets, she realized just how flimsy that armor had been. The chapel creaked. A distant boom echoed. The mountain wasn't done. Marco stood. "I'll take first watch. Get some rest." She nodded, lying down on the cold stone floor, using her bag as a pillow. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of fire and falling. She woke hours later to faint light bleeding through the high windows and the smell of smoke still thick in the air. Outside, the world was quieter. Not peaceful, just holding its breath. Marco had made coffee on a small camping stove. She accepted a tin cup with shaking hands. "Thank you," she murmured. "We have a window," he said. "If we go now, we might reach the safe zone." "What about the roads?" "Blocked. But I know a way." "It's risky." Of course it was. Everything about this was risk. Lucia's parents couldn't travel fast, but they were ready. The five of them stepped out into a landscape transformed. Ash blanketed everything like snow, but hotter, dirtier, suffocating. The sun was a faint white disk in the sky. Trees were scorched. Houses looked like ruins from another century. Emily tightened her scarf over her mouth, adjusted her pack, and followed Marco's lead. They moved through alleys and paths known only to locals, winding upward to avoid lava flows and falling debris. As they walked, Emily's thoughts returned again and again to her mother. Rosa had once walked these same roads, seen this same sky, heard this same mountain breathe fire. Emily's boots crunched against ash and cinder, every step a connection to a past she barely understood. It was then she realized that she had never really asked who her mother was before becoming her mother. She had never been curious about Rosa the girl, the survivor, the one who ran from fire. All her life, Emily had looked forward, toward the next degree, the next grant, the next publication. But here, now, she was being dragged backward, into a legacy written in lava. A sudden crack split the silence. Marco grabbed her arm, pulling her back just as a chunk of weakened road gave way, crumbling into a smoldering ravine. They took a different path, slower, more dangerous. Hours passed. At one point, Lucia began to sing, softly, an old folk song Emily didn't understand. But the melody was soothing. Grounding. The kind of thing passed through generations. They reached a high ridge just as another tremor shook the earth. This one was sharper. More violent. The mountain in the distance lit up again, spewing molten rock and smoke into the heavens. The sky darkened unnaturally. Emily grabbed her journal, recording readings on her wristwatch altimeter and temperature gauge. A habit. A reflex. Science amid chaos. "There's a cave up ahead," Marco shouted. "Old lava tubes. Might buy us time." They ran the last stretch, helping Lucia's parents through loose rock. Inside the tube, it was cooler, darker, damp. But safe. For now. Emily sank to her knees, heart pounding. She pulled the letter from her pocket and opened it again. "If you're reading this, the mountain has called you home," Rosa had written. "I never wanted to tell you about the eruption. About what I saw. What I lost. I thought if I buried it, I could protect you. But pain doesn't disappear, Emily. It just waits." Emily's fingers traced the lines. She finally understood. Her mother hadn't run from Etna. She had survived it, and that survival shaped everything. It shaped her silence. Her distance. Her fierce love that Emily only now could see. The cave echoed with silence, with the weight of memory and ash. Emily looked around at the small group. Marco watching the tremors with practiced eyes, Lucia humming to herself while tending to her parents, and Emily herself, sitting with a letter in one hand and her past in the other. "I'm not running anymore," she whispered. "Not from this." Outside, the mountain continued to burn, a monument to both destruction and rebirth. The stale air inside the lava tube pressed close, as if the mountain itself were breathing down their necks. The flickering light from Marco's headlamp cast long, dancing shadows on the curved rock walls, every crack and crevice seemingly alive with tension. Emily sat against the cool stone, knees pulled to her chest, the open letter resting on her lap, its corners curled and smudged by soot and sweat. Her thoughts moved in chaotic spirals, circling the same relentless questions. How had everything in her life unraveled so fast? Why had she waited until disaster struck to confront the silence that had haunted her relationship with her mother? And why, now that she was closer to understanding, did it all feel so painfully out of reach? A tremor rumbled through the earth again, subtle but present, a constant reminder that Etna was far from finished. She glanced at Marco, who stood near the cave's mouth with his hands on his hips, scanning the dim light outside for signs of another eruption. His jaw was tight, but there was a calm to him that Emily couldn't understand. He had lived his life here, in the volcano's shadow, dancing with danger like it was just another part of daily life. She envied that sense of control, or maybe it was just acceptance. Lucia murmured quietly to her mother, who sat huddled in a wool shawl beside her husband, their faces drawn and gray from fatigue. The older couple had said little since they'd fled the chapel, but their eyes were wide open, constantly scanning the darkness, whispering prayers in Italian that rose and fell like the wind. Emily's own thoughts turned to Kyle again. Not because she missed him, she didn't, but because he was the last person who had tried to pull her out of her emotional bunker. He used to accuse her of hiding behind her work, of choosing tectonic plates over people. She had always fired back that her work was about people, about saving lives by understanding the movements of the earth. But now, here in the middle of devastation, she realized he had been right in one fundamental way: she had never allowed herself to feel completely, not with him, not with anyone. She studied lava flows, eruptions, seismic pressure, but she never examined her own internal fault lines. Not until now. "We can't stay here much longer," Marco said suddenly, his voice slicing through the thick quiet. "I need to check the slope east of us. If it's stable, we'll try to move before nightfall." Emily nodded, rising to her feet. "I'll go with you." Marco hesitated, then handed her a second flashlight. "Stay close. This area hasn't been mapped in years." They moved through the tunnel, careful not to disturb the loose rocks beneath their feet. As they emerged into the open air again, Emily's breath caught. The landscape had transformed overnight. Trees were blackened skeletons, ash blanketed the hills like a sinister snowfall, and in the distance, Etna's peak spewed a slow but steady plume of smoke that curled upward into the bruised sky. The air was thick with sulfur, hot and sticky against her skin. "It's like the end of the world," she whispered. "No," Marco said quietly. "This is what rebirth looks like." She looked at him, surprised. "You really believe that?" He gave a slight shrug. "The mountain destroys, yes. But it also creates. New soil, new paths, new beginnings. You just have to survive the fire." Emily turned away, the weight of his words heavy. She wondered if her mother had believed in new beginnings when she fled this same mountain all those years ago. Or if she had simply chosen survival over everything else. They walked the ridge in silence, stopping at a narrow outcrop where Marco knelt and pressed his hand to the ground. He pulled out a small seismograph from his bag, adjusting the settings. "The pressure's still rising," he said, scanning the screen. "There's another eruption coming." "How big?" "Too big." Emily stared at the horizon. Somewhere out there was safety. But it felt impossibly far away. "We need to find a way to signal for help," she said. "No one knows where we are. Cell service is gone. Radio's dead." Marco stood, brushing ash from his knees. "There's an old station north of here. Abandoned, but it might still have a working tower. If the antenna survived, we could transmit a message." "How far?" "Half a day. Maybe less if the path isn't blocked." Emily inhaled slowly. "Let's do it." They returned to the cave and relayed the plan to Lucia, who looked both terrified and relieved. "I'll stay here with my parents," she said. "You two go. If you find help, come back for us." Marco agreed. They packed quickly: water, flares, the emergency transmitter, first aid supplies. As they left, Emily felt the knot in her chest tighten. It wasn't just fear. It was something deeper: guilt, maybe, for leaving people behind. For not being enough. But Marco set a steady pace through the ash-covered terrain, his footsteps confident, almost reverent. "You knew my mother," Emily said suddenly. "Didn't you?" He didn't answer at first. Then, "Yes. Not well, but I remember her. She was kind. Brave. She saved my sister during the '83 eruption. Pulled her out of a collapsing house." Emily blinked, startled. "She never told me that." "Maybe she didn't want you to carry it." "Carry what?" "The fear. The weight of this place. Some people survive it, but they never escape it." Emily walked in silence, digesting the truth. Her mother hadn't been just a survivor. She had been a hero. And she had buried that part of herself so deeply that even her daughter never saw it. They reached the station ruins by late afternoon. The building was a concrete relic of the Cold War, its edges rounded by wind and ash. The front door was broken, hanging from rusted hinges. Inside, it was dark and musty, but surprisingly intact. Dust-coated consoles lined the walls, their lights long dead. Marco moved swiftly, checking wires and testing circuits. "We need the generator," he muttered. "And some luck." Emily found the backup power switch, flipped it. Nothing. Then a faint hum. Lights flickered. One of the monitors glowed dimly. Marco grinned. "That's our luck." He connected the emergency transmitter, tuned the frequency, and began broadcasting. "This is Marco Santoro, volcanologist, reporting from coordinates 37.7510 degrees north, 14.9934 degrees east. We have a group of civilians trapped near Etna's southeast ridge. Immediate evacuation requested. Repeat, immediate evacuation requested." They repeated the message every few minutes. Emily stood at the window, watching the horizon. "Do you think anyone's listening?" "We'll know soon." The sun dipped low, casting the world in a dull red hue. Another tremor hit, stronger this time. Dust fell from the ceiling. "We can't stay here," Marco said. "Not overnight. The next blast might take this whole ridge." They gathered their things and started back toward the cave. But halfway down the trail, the mountain groaned. A low roar built from deep within, rising like a tidal wave. Emily turned and saw the sky turn gold and red as molten rock exploded from the summit. "Run!" Marco shouted. They sprinted, dodging falling debris, the earth shaking beneath their feet. Trees cracked. Fire burst from the ground. A wall of heat chased them. Emily's legs burned. Her lungs screamed. But she kept going, following Marco through the smoke, through fear, through pain. They reached the edge of the lava tube just as the sky opened with ash and fury. Inside, they collapsed, coughing, gasping, trembling. Lucia cried out in relief when she saw them. Her parents held each other, eyes wide with terror. "Did it work?" she asked. Emily nodded. "We sent the message. Will help come?" Emily looked at the mountain, still spewing fire. "It has to." Darkness settled into the lava tube like an uninvited guest, thick and heavy, curling in every crevice of stone as if the mountain itself was exhaling its sorrow. Emily sat beside Lucia and her family, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders as surely as the ash covering the world outside. The only light came from Marco's flickering headlamp, casting fractured beams across the cave walls and creating monstrous shadows that shifted with every movement. No one spoke for a long time. Every breath felt borrowed. Every heartbeat a quiet act of rebellion against the chaos roaring beyond the stone. The smell of sulfur coated the back of Emily's throat, bitter and burning. Her clothes stuck to her skin, damp with sweat and grime, but her mind was clearer now, honed by fear and purpose. Somewhere out there, someone had to hear their message. Someone had to be listening. Rescue wasn't just a hope, it was the last thread holding them together. "How long do you think it'll take them to get here?" Lucia asked, her voice small, cracking from the dryness of her throat and the weight of unspoken dread. Marco answered without looking up, his eyes scanning the handheld GPS in his lap. If they receive the signal, maybe tomorrow. If the roads are clear. If the winds shift. If they're willing to risk it. So many ifs, Emily thought. So many cracks in the plan, like cracks in the earth itself, one too many, and the whole thing would collapse. And if they didn't hear it? Lucia asked. The silence that followed was answer enough. Emily reached into her pack, pulling out her water bottle. She took a measured sip, then passed it to Lucia. It was nearly empty, and the rationing had begun hours ago, but it felt wrong to withhold even a drop now. The old couple, Lucia's parents, barely moved. They sat huddled together, eyes half closed, murmuring occasionally in Italian. Words that felt like prayers, or maybe just memory. Emily remembered holding her mother's hand in the hospital during the final days, watching the strong woman who once ran from lava flows now struggle against a far quieter but no less vicious enemy. Rosa never talked about pain. She wore it like armor, and Emily had only started to understand the reasons why after reading that final letter. I tried to protect you from this, it had said. From the weight of knowing. From the fire that lives in the blood. At first Emily thought it was metaphor, something poetic and vague. But now, after walking through fire herself, she felt it too, that primal heat that came not just from the volcano, but from somewhere deep inside, something inherited, ancient. The fire that drives you forward when everything else says give up. Emily stood suddenly, needing to move, to breathe, to not feel like a trapped animal waiting for the end. She gestured to Marco, and he nodded. They both stepped outside the cave mouth, just far enough to survey the sky. The ash had thickened again, turning the stars to ghosts behind a dirty gray veil. The ground trembled intermittently, the same way a person shivers with fever. Etna wasn't resting, it was reloading. Any sign? Emily asked. Marco scanned the horizon. No. But we're still high enough. If a chopper comes, we might see the lights. Emily's fingers tightened around the straps of her bag. Do you think they'll come? Marco turned to her, his face unreadable. They'll come. Maybe not for us, maybe not soon. But someone always comes. Eventually. She wanted to believe that. But hope was a fragile thing, and out here it cracked just as easily as the stone beneath their feet. She thought of Kyle again, not because she missed him, but because of the way he always demanded certainty from her. He hated that she spoke in probabilities, in maybes and margins of error. Do you even feel anything? He'd once shouted during an argument, standing in the kitchen with a half-packed suitcase beside him. Or do you just calculate what feelings are supposed to look like? She hadn't known how to answer. Maybe she still didn't. But now, watching the world burn and feeling her own heart ache for people she had just met, for a mother she never truly understood, for herself, yes, now she knew she felt things. She just never learned how to show it. Marco sat down on a boulder, pulling a small notebook from his jacket pocket. It was water-stained and blackened along the edges. He scribbled something down without explanation. Emily tilted her head. You journal? He shrugged. We all record in our own way. Data. Emotions. Memory. Doesn't matter. When the mountain takes everything, it's the one thing we can leave behind. Emily didn't say anything for a moment. Then, slowly, she opened her own journal. Pages smeared with ash and sweat, half the writing illegible. She flipped to a blank space and began to write, not about seismic waves or gas emissions, but about Rosa. About herself. About a fire that lived in the blood. They sat like that for a while, two people in the belly of the world, surrounded by fire and silence. Then, faintly, just barely, a distant sound. A low whir. A vibration in the air more than the ground. Emily's head snapped up. Do you hear that? Marco stood instantly. Yes. They ran back inside. Lucia. Your parents. Get up, we might have a chopper coming in. Confusion and hope collided in everyone's faces. They grabbed their things quickly, moving like people who had almost forgotten what it meant to believe they might survive. Outside, the sound grew louder. Emily looked to the sky, heart pounding. Then she saw it, a blinking red light cutting through the ash clouds. A helicopter, flying low, erratic, fighting the turbulent air. She waved both arms. Marco fired one of the flares. It streaked red across the dark sky, a fragile scream against the roar of the volcano. The chopper circled, uncertain. Emily grabbed the second flare, igniting it and holding it high, running out into the clearing near the cave's mouth. The heat from the ground burned her soles, but she didn't care. She waved the flare until her arm ached. Finally, the chopper began to descend. Dust and ash exploded outward as it landed, rotors sending everything into chaos. The side door opened. A rescue worker in a full-face mask shouted in Italian, gesturing wildly. Emily didn't need translation. Let's go, she screamed, grabbing Lucia's arm. Together they guided the parents across the rocky terrain, Marco covering the rear. They helped the old couple in first, then Lucia. Marco lifted Emily by the arm as they both jumped aboard. The door slammed shut. The chopper lifted, swaying dangerously in the hot wind. Inside, the noise was deafening, but Emily didn't hear any of it. She looked down at the burning mountain, at the village smothered in ash, at the land that had changed her in ways no data set ever could. She thought of Rosa. Of how she'd fled. Of how she'd survived. And of how, through fire and ruin, she had passed that same strength to her daughter. Emily closed her eyes, the tears coming freely now, not from fear, not from grief, but from release. She was alive. And she knew, finally, what she had been searching for. Not just answers. But roots. Identity. Forgiveness. The helicopter flew into the smoky sky, away from the mountain. But the fire remained inside her. The helicopter's whirring blades gradually faded into a dull background hum as Emily pressed her forehead to the vibrating window, her breath fogging the scratched glass while the broken landscape of Sicily sprawled beneath them like a wound in the earth. From this height, the damage was biblical, whole stretches of hillside turned black with ash, tiny dots that were once homes smudged into the terrain, rivers of hardened lava slicing through villages like cruel brushstrokes of fate. Etna's plume towered behind them, a column of rage and memory rising into the heavens, still belching smoke and fire into the bruised sky. Emily's body ached from the exertion, her skin stung from the heat and grime, but it was her mind that felt the most raw, like an old wound reopened by too many truths at once. She stole a glance across the cramped interior of the chopper at Lucia, who held her mother's hand tightly, whispering reassurances in Italian while tears streamed down her soot-streaked cheeks. Lucia's father stared blankly ahead, lips moving in silent prayer or disbelief or both, his hands clenched in his lap as if he still couldn't trust that this wasn't a dream, or a nightmare. Marco sat across from Emily, hunched forward slightly, one arm braced against the wall to steady himself as the aircraft bucked in the turbulent thermal air. His expression was unreadable, calm yet guarded, like a man whose entire life had existed beneath the threat of disaster and who had simply learned to live inside the tension. Emily looked away. For a long time, she had believed knowledge was the ultimate armor, that if she could just explain the world through data, through science, through theory, she could shield herself from the chaos. But nothing in her textbooks had prepared her for the sound of a mountain cracking open, or the feel of molten earth beneath her feet, or the emotional tremors of facing a truth her mother had never dared speak aloud. She remembered the last line of Rosa's letter again, "You are stronger than me." And now, for the first time, she wondered if that was true, or if her mother had simply hoped it would be. "We'll be landing soon," the pilot's voice came through the headset in broken English, rough and static-laced. "Base camp. Northeast Sector. Refugees and Medical. Emily nodded absently though no one could see her. Her fingers clenched the strap of her backpack tighter. Inside it were soil samples, her weather-scorched journal, Rosa's letter, and a flash drive with years of research that now felt like it had been scribbled by someone she no longer knew. When the helicopter finally touched down, it was on a rough field that had been turned into a makeshift base camp, a web of white tents, whirring generators, blinking emergency lights, and the smell of antiseptic and smoke coexisting in the thick air. Medics rushed forward the moment the chopper doors slid open, helping Lucia's parents first, guiding them gently onto stretchers with soft voices and practiced hands. Emily stepped out onto solid ground that didn't feel all that solid, her legs trembling beneath her as adrenaline finally began to ebb from her system. A nurse approached her with a blanket and a bottle of water, but she waved them off with a quiet thank you, her eyes locked on the organized chaos around her. Dozens of families huddled in clusters, faces streaked with ash and grief, children clutching stuffed animals turned gray from dust. Aid workers moved between tents with purposeful energy, clipboards in hand, shouting over the noise. The scale of devastation hit her harder here than it had in the cave. Up close, it wasn't just disaster, it was loss, disorientation, entire lives suspended in limbo. This way, Marco said, nodding toward a debriefed tent with a white cross painted on its side. She followed him in silence, the two of them stepping into the shelter where a young official with tired eyes and a thick folder greeted them. "Name?" he asked, pen poised over a clipboard. "Emily Carter," she replied. "American. Geologist. I was on site when it started." The man scribbled furiously, then looked at Marco. "Marco Santoro. Local scientist. Coordinates logged in broadcast." "We received your signal," the official said, giving Marco a nod of gratitude. "You saved lives." Marco said nothing, just looked down at his boots. The official continued, flipping pages. "We're doing flyovers now to locate isolated groups. But the lava flows have destroyed most of the major routes. It's going to take time." "How bad is it?" Emily asked, her voice hoarse. "Worse than we thought," he replied without hesitation. "The east side is nearly cut off. Communication towers are down. Some villages haven't checked in at all. And the tremors haven't stopped." Emily felt the familiar tug of duty and instinct. She wanted to be out there, mapping fault lines, analyzing gas patterns, coordinating rescue. But more than that, she needed to sit still and figure out what came next for her, not as a scientist, but as a daughter, as a person. "I want to help," she said. "I have experience with volcanic activity, terrain models, seismic forecasting. I can be useful." The official looked surprised but nodded. "We'll find a place for you. Rest for now." Outside the tent, dusk was falling again, the sky a strange, dirty gold as ash particles refracted the fading sunlight. Emily wandered back toward the main camp, her steps slow, deliberate. In the center, someone had erected a makeshift board covered in handwritten notes, messages for missing people, pleas for news, sketches of loved ones. She stopped, staring at the wall of desperate hope, and for a moment imagined her own name there. Lost. Searching. Waiting to be found. Marco appeared beside her, arms crossed. "It always looks like this after the big ones," he said. "The chaos. The heartbreak. Then comes the quiet. And people rebuild." "Have you seen this before?" she asked. "Something this bad?" "Not since I was a kid," he replied. "That eruption, the one your mother survived, was my first memory of fear. My sister almost died. Rosa pulled her out of the rubble. I still remember the way she didn't cry. She just acted." Emily swallowed hard. "She never told me any of that." "Maybe she didn't know how," Marco said softly. "Maybe she thought it would hurt you. Or maybe she just didn't want to relive it. Emily looked up at the mountain again, its peak just barely visible through the haze. I didn't know who she was. Not really. Now you do, Marco said. And you're still here. That night, Emily lay in a cot inside one of the white tents, staring at the nylon ceiling while distant sobs and hushed voices drifted around her. She held Rosa's letter again, rereading it under the weak beam of a flashlight, every word now a map leading her home. Not to a country or a house, but to an understanding. Her mother hadn't abandoned her past, she had buried it, thinking that was strength. But strength wasn't silence. It was survival. It was sharing. It was showing up even when the world cracked open beneath your feet. Somewhere outside, Etna rumbled again. The ground trembled. And Emily didn't flinch. The smoke still hovered over the camp like a low-hanging curse, a thick, gray shroud that dulled the color from everything it touched, turning the white of tents to sickly beige, washing the blue sky into a smothered veil. Morning came without light, just a steady glow from behind the haze and the sharp smell of sulfur mixed with burnt wood and damp earth. Emily rose from her cot slowly, her limbs stiff from cold and fatigue, her back aching from days of tension held too tightly. Around her, the temporary shelter buzzed with restrained movement, volunteers passing between tents, medics issuing quiet orders, children murmuring in sleep. It was the kind of atmosphere where grief and hope lived side by side, not touching but aware of each other. She stepped outside with her notebook tucked under one arm and Rosa's letter tucked in the other, both of them creased, soot-smudged, and frayed at the corners like parts of her soul. She hadn't slept more than an hour or two, thoughts cycling through memories that weren't hers but that now felt part of her DNA, the eruptions of the past, the story Marco told about Rosa saving his sister, the way her mother must have carried that fear in silence for decades. The mountain had taken many things from her family, time, truth, and connection, but somehow, in its destruction, it had given her a strange inheritance too. She wandered past the tent rows toward the edge of the base camp, where a makeshift observation post had been set up with tripods, satellite maps, and a large digital screen rigged to a half-functioning generator. Marco stood there already, windbreaker zipped high, arms crossed over his chest as he stared at the topographic feed of Etna's slope. The lines pulsed red with thermal heat readings and stress fractures, jagged like spiderwebs cracking a windshield. She's not done, he said, without turning. Emily nodded, stepping up beside him. What's the projection? 3 more fissures opened last night. Lava flows moved north. It could redirect again, depending on pressure buildup. Tremor activity? Increasing. We're in a lull between eruptions. A false calm, Emily said. Exactly. They stood in silence, watching the lines shift slowly. I told the coordinator I want to help with terrain analysis, she added after a moment. They're organizing scout teams for hazard mapping. Marco glanced at her. You sure you want to go back out there? I need to. Because of the science, or because of her? Emily met his eyes. Both. He nodded once. Good answer. The assignment came quicker than she expected. Within an hour, she was issued gear, a drone scanner, a field radio, and coordinates for a ridge east of Nicolosi that had been inaccessible since the second major eruption. Her group was a mix of local volunteers and international specialists, most of them strangers, though she recognized one geologist from her university days, a quiet guy named Alan who specialized in rock compositions but hated human conversation. The hike out was slow, not from distance but from terrain. The land had shifted. Roads were gone. What once were smooth paths were now jagged with cooling lava, boulders, and charred trees leaning like the skeletal remains of some ancient war. Every few steps kicked up a puff of ash. Every creak of the ground made hearts skip. Emily moved with practiced caution, her drone scanning the ridgeline ahead, relaying thermal data back to the tablet strapped to her forearm. The numbers weren't comforting. Beneath the cooling surface, pressure built steadily. We're standing on a crust of lies, Alan muttered at one point. Beneath it is murder. Poetic, Emily said, without smiling. Truth, he replied. They reached the observation point by midday, a small plateau overlooking what had once been a vineyard. Now it was a moonscape, grapes turned to cinders, rows of stakes poking out from the ash like broken teeth. Emily set up her scanner and knelt beside a crack in the ground, waving a sensor wand slowly over the jagged opening. The temperature reading spiked immediately, too high for comfort. Subsurface flow, she said into the radio. Still active. A voice on the other end crackled. Copy. Evacuation warning still holds. Alan climbed a short ridge for a better view, snapping photos with a high-res camera, his voice unusually animated as he dictated rock types and formation ages into a recorder. Emily stayed crouched by the crack, peering into the narrow void. Beneath the crust, a faint red glow pulsed like a heartbeat. The earth was not asleep. It was biding time. She pulled out her notebook and jotted down a sequence of quick numbers, thermal variances, pressure assumptions, gas readings, then hesitated. On the next page, she wrote one line, "What were you running from, Mom? And what made you stay gone so long?" She stared at it. In the context of the volcano, it felt almost selfish to think about family. But the deeper she went into this disaster, the more she saw how personal history and geologic history weren't so different. Both built pressure. Both hid fault lines. Both erupted. The team radioed and updated coordinates and began the slow return hike, tracing a loop toward the north edge of the base camp. But halfway down, another tremor hit. This one was sharper, angrier. The ground shifted beneath their boots. Ash cascaded from the trees like rain. Somewhere in the distance, a deep roar echoed. "We need to move," Emily said. "Now." Alan was already backing down the hill, but one of the volunteers, a teenage boy from Catania, had frozen in place, eyes wide, limbs trembling. "Hey!" Emily shouted, rushing to him. "You have to move, okay? Right now. With me." He didn't respond. Just stared past her at the rising plume now forming over the mountain again. Another growl. This one louder. The mountain was waking again. Emily grabbed his arm and pulled. "Come on." Finally, he stumbled forward, feet clumsy on the ash. They ran, breath coming in ragged gulps, the air hot and thick with dust. A burst of fire shot into the sky behind them, orange and gold against the gray. It was smaller than the last eruption, but closer. Too close. They didn't stop until the trees thickened again, and a collapsed stone wall offered some illusion of shelter. Everyone dropped behind it, coughing, shielding their faces. "Status?" A voice crackled over the radio. "Minor flank eruption," Emily wheezed. "No injuries. Continuing retreat. Coordinates uploading now." The return to camp was nearly silent after that, everyone too shaken to speak. But Emily's mind raced with thoughts, not just of the eruption, but of the fragility of everything she saw. Lives. Landscapes. Even her own certainty. She remembered something Rosa had written, "There's no controlling the fire. Only choosing who you stand beside when it burns." She had chosen to come here. She had chosen to face what her mother had fled. And now, maybe for the first time, she felt like she understood not just the science, but the sacrifice. When she returned to camp, dusk had fallen again, but the air was brighter, less choking. The wind had shifted, pushing the ash inland instead of toward the tents. A medic handed her water. Another gave her a nod. She walked back to the main tent where Marco was sorting through supply boxes. "Bad one?" he asked. She nodded. "Still alive, though. That's more than some can say." Emily reached into her pack and pulled out a stone. Blackened, sharp, still warm. From the ridge. Fresh flow. Might tell us something. Marco took it, studying the shape. You've changed, he said quietly. She looked at him. The mountain will do that to you. He held up the stone. No. Not just this. You're not just here to study it anymore. Emily exhaled slowly. I know. I think I'm here to forgive it. And your mother? Her too. Outside, Etna grumbled again. But Emily didn't flinch this time. She listened. The morning arrived with no ceremony, just the slow lifting of the smoke veil that had cloaked the camp for days, revealing a world still broken, still grieving, but breathing again. Emily sat at a folding table near the main relief tent, the scarred surface littered with field reports, satellite images, and her own hastily scribbled notes from the ridge. Her fingers were stained with graphite and ash, her boots still caked with mud from the previous day's retreat, but there was a steadiness in her chest now that hadn't been there before. Not peace, not even clarity, but a quiet determination that settled behind her eyes and braced her spine. She was no longer just observing this disaster, she was part of it, entangled in it, and from that entanglement had come something raw and real. In front of her lay Rosa's letter again, now folded neatly next to her notebook. She'd read it so many times the words no longer surprised her, but today, she planned to write back. Not to mail it, not even to show anyone, but to respond, to release the thoughts that had piled up inside her like lava behind a dam. The pen hovered in her hand for a long moment before she began, her handwriting slow and careful. Dear Mom. You didn't tell me everything. You probably thought you were protecting me. Maybe you were. Maybe I wasn't ready to understand then. Maybe you weren't ready to explain. But now I've walked where you walked. I've seen the world tear itself apart and felt it shake inside my chest. And somehow, I think I understand you more now than I ever did when you were alive. You weren't just a survivor. You were a fighter. You were terrified, but you stayed calm. You chose silence because you thought it was strength. But what I've learned is that strength is sharing the truth, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. She paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve, then continued. I used to be angry. At you. At the world. At myself. For the things we didn't say. For the stories you left buried. But the mountain told me something this week, in its own language of fire and silence. It said that we carry each other's pain whether we speak it aloud or not. That it lives in our bones, our breath, our choices. I carry yours now. And maybe, by facing this place, I can put something to rest that you never could. A noise pulled her attention from the page, a loud discussion at the western edge of the camp where the incoming road met the perimeter. A military truck had arrived, its tires crusted with dried mud, its sides streaked with soot. Several people stood near it, unloading crates, but at the center of the commotion stood Lucia, waving her arms, her face red with emotion. Emily stood quickly, folding the letter and slipping it into her pocket. She jogged across the gravel and ash-packed ground toward the cluster, catching snippets of Italian as she approached. The words were heated, clipped, grief-fueled. What happened? Emily asked, reaching Lucia's side. Lucia's eyes were wet, jaw clenched. They told me. My cousin. My aunt. They didn't make it. Emily's breath caught. Oh, God. I'm so sorry. They were in Milo. The road was cut off. They didn't evacuate fast enough. Lucia looked away, blinking hard. They thought they had more time. Emily placed a hand on her shoulder. You did everything you could. Lucia shook her head slowly. That's the thing. I didn't. I kept thinking we'd be okay. Like bad things wouldn't happen to us. Nobody can prepare for this, Emily said gently. Even when we know it's coming, we never really believe it until it's already here. They stood in silence, two women united by loss in a place where the earth didn't care who it took or what was left behind. Finally, Lucia turned to her. You know, I used to hate this mountain. Every time it roared, I felt like it was mocking us. Like it was reminding us how powerless we are. But now, she trailed off, squinting toward the smoky horizon. Now I think maybe it just wants to be understood. Emily looked toward Etna's jagged silhouette. Mountains speak in eruptions. They don't destroy to punish. They just release what's been buried. Later that day, Emily was called to the coordination tent for a briefing. A new fissure had opened near Piano Provenzana, an area that was once a ski resort and now stood half buried under cooled lava and ash. A drone had picked up signs of movement, possible survivors or looters, it wasn't clear. Emily was assigned to accompany a small team to investigate. The terrain was unstable, but the window was short. If another eruption came, anyone out there would be trapped. By late afternoon, they were on foot again, hiking through steep trails carved from frozen ash, each step sending up small clouds that coated their gear and skin. Emily led the group through a narrow pass, guided by topographic data and her growing instinct for how the mountain moved. It wasn't a science at this point, it was something deeper. A language she was just beginning to understand. They reached the plateau just as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the scarred earth. The ruins of a building emerged ahead, half swallowed by lava, its roof collapsed, walls scorched. "Looks like the lodge," said one of the scouts, his voice muffled through a respirator. "We check inside, then sweep the perimeter." Emily approached the entrance carefully, ducking under a sagging beam. The air inside was stifling, heavy with soot. Her flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing overturned furniture, shattered glass, a collapsed counter. Then a noise, a cough. Faint. Real. "Hold up," she called out. "I heard something." She moved toward the sound, climbing over debris until she reached a small hallway partially blocked by fallen stone. "Hello?" she shouted. "Rescue team, can you hear me?" A reply came, weak but clear. "Here. Please." The team sprang into action. Over the next 10 minutes, they cleared enough debris to reveal a small pocket in the rubble, where a young man and a teenage girl huddled together, both covered in ash, their faces pale but alive. Emily knelt beside them. "You're safe now," she said. "We've got you." The girl burst into tears. The man could only nod. It took nearly an hour to stabilize and extract them, but when they finally emerged into the fading light, Emily felt something shift in her chest, not just pride, but purpose. This is why she had come. Not for numbers. Not for closure. For this. For life pulled from beneath the ash. For hope pulled from beneath the weight of loss. That night, back at camp, Emily sat again by the folding table. She took out the letter she had written to Rosa earlier and reread it in the lantern's glow. Then, on a fresh page, she began to write something new, not to her mother this time, but to herself. Dear Emily. You are not just your mother's daughter. You are not just a scientist. You are a survivor. A witness. A bridge between the Earth's fury and humanity's fragility. You walked into fire and walked out stronger. Not because you were unafraid, but because you didn't stop moving. Keep going. Keep listening. Keep forgiving. The mountain may still burn. But so does your spirit. She didn't sign it. She didn't need to. The words were enough. Outside, Etna exhaled again, smoke curling into the night sky like ink in water. But for once, the silence that followed didn't feel ominous. It felt like understanding. The next morning arrived with deceptive calm, the kind that made the sky look clean and the air carry a fragile quiet, like the mountain had drawn a long breath but wasn't finished exhaling. Emily stood by the perimeter of the base camp, scanning the upper ridges of Etna with her field binoculars, watching for any sign of new movement, her senses sharp now not just from training but from the experience of having stood inside the mountain's wrath. She wasn't just observing anymore, she was interpreting, feeling the subtle cues of the land, the stillness that wasn't peace but a pause. A moment later, Marco joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee, the contents sloshing slightly from the uneven terrain. He handed her one without a word and stared at the horizon beside her, his face weathered, but calm. "It's too quiet," he said finally. "She's waiting." Emily nodded. "The pressure's still rising. Gas readings are off the charts. There's going to be another rupture. We need to map the western caldera," Marco said. "If that fissure expands, it'll cut off the last evacuation route." "I know," Emily replied. "I'll go." "We'll go," he corrected, his voice firm. "I'm not sending you out there alone." She didn't argue. After what they'd already been through, she welcomed the solidarity. The west slope had always been volatile, scarred by previous eruptions and filled with unstable rock that could crumble without warning. They loaded up with fresh gear, climbing harnesses, drones, thermal sensors, and emergency beacons, then checked in with base camp control and headed out with 2 local guides familiar with the terrain. The hike was brutal. The air was thinner here, laced with particles that stuck to the throat and eyes, and the terrain shifted beneath their feet like an untrustworthy lie. Emily moved with cautious precision, each step placed deliberately, her eyes always flicking ahead for signs of cracks or loose rock. Marco walked beside her silently for the most part, only occasionally breaking the quiet to point out old lava flows or collapsed tubes hidden beneath the dust. After nearly 2 hours of climbing, they reached the observation point, a narrow ridge that overlooked a broad depression in the earth, the western caldera yawning open like a wound. Emily unpacked her equipment quickly, setting up the drone and feeding it flight coordinates. The small machine buzzed to life and rose into the air, its camera transmitting live images to the tablet strapped to her forearm. She guided it carefully over the slope, watching as the landscape unfolded, jagged rock, freshly opened fissures, heat blooms glowing beneath the crust like veins of molten gold. "It's shifting," Marco said, watching the screen. "You see that ridge line?" Emily zoomed in, her fingers adjusting the feed. "Yeah. There's deformation. The ground's lifting. Probably magma buildup underneath. We need to send this to the camp," he said. "If that ridge collapses, it'll bury the lower valley. And half the access roads." She transmitted the data immediately, tagging it urgent, and added a voice note for context. Then she looked up at the sky. The clouds were thinning, but something in the air felt charged, like static before a lightning strike. A deep rumble vibrated the ground, soft at first, then building. "Tremor," one of the guides shouted. "Incoming." Emily braced herself against a nearby rock just as the earth convulsed, a sharp vertical jolt that nearly threw her off balance. Loose stones tumbled down the slope, dust exploding into the air. The drone feed went haywire, static breaking the signal before it cut out entirely. "Back!" Marco yelled. "We have to move." They turned and scrambled down the slope, the ground still shaking intermittently beneath them. Small fissures split open along the path, steam hissing out in bursts as if the mountain were venting its fury. Emily slipped once, catching herself just before her knee hit sharp rock, then kept going, lungs burning, heart pounding. Behind them, a dull explosion echoed, a new fissure opening, closer than any before. They didn't look back. There was no time. It wasn't until they reached a flatter section of the trail that the tremors eased, the mountain settling again into its waiting silence. Emily leaned against a boulder, catching her breath, sweat pouring down her face. Marco was already checking the guides, making sure everyone was intact. "We can't go back that way," Emily said, wiping ash from her eyes. "The path's gone. We'll have to take the long loop east," Marco replied grimly. "It'll add hours." "We don't have hours," she said. "If that caldera collapses, I know." He hesitated. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "Just tired of running." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're not the same woman who got off that plane last week." "No," she agreed. "I'm not." They began the long detour around the slope, the terrain growing denser with twisted trees and old lava fields. As they walked, Emily's thoughts drifted again to Rosa, what she had endured, how she had faced this kind of terror decades ago without drones or data or even a reliable exit strategy. How she had shielded her daughter from it not by explaining, but by disappearing. And how Emily, now in the same fire, was making a different choice. She didn't want to hide her fear. She wanted to use it. They made it back to camp just before sunset, their return met with hurried voices and a flurry of questions. Emily uploaded her data immediately, then briefed the emergency team with Marco at her side. The western ridge was unstable. A full evacuation of the secondary camp zone was ordered within the hour. She watched as tents were struck, supplies moved, children carried in their sleep to safer zones, all under the watchful eye of the restless mountain. Later, sitting alone by the medical tent, Emily pulled out her notebook again. She didn't write this time. She just held it in her lap and stared at the pages, fingers running over the ash-stained cover. The woman she had been when she first arrived, the detached scientist chasing clarity, was gone. In her place stood someone forged by fire, cracked open by grief, but reassembled with resolve. She didn't have all the answers. But she had purpose. And that was enough. Marco joined her after a while, sitting without speaking for several minutes. Then he said, "The camp's secure. For now." "Good," Emily said. "Because it's not over." "No. It's not." He paused. "You know what I remember most from that eruption years ago?" She shook her head. "The silence after. Not the explosions. Not the fire. The silence. Like the mountain had said everything it needed to say, and now it was up to us to listen." Emily stared at the dark silhouette of Etna. "I'm listening now. Then you'll know when it speaks again." And in that moment, under the ash-streaked sky and beside the mountain that had shaped generations of pain and resilience, Emily understood that surviving wasn't the same as healing. But it was the first step. And she had taken it. The sun had barely risen above the jagged skyline of Etna when the first call came in. Static-heavy radio chatter from a monitoring post north of Zaffarana Etnia reporting a deep rupture, one that hadn't been there the night before. Emily was already awake, reviewing thermal scans from the previous 24 hours, her fingers scrolling through data like someone searching for a coded message hidden between the numbers. As the report came in, she leaned closer to the screen, eyes narrowing at the subtle uptick in gas emissions that had started 4 hours earlier and now spiked violently upward. The mountain was warning them again, not with fury yet, but with urgency. She left the tent before the briefing was even called, grabbing her gear instinctively, boots crunching over the hardened ash layer that had settled overnight like gray snowfall. The air was sharp, biting at her lungs. Marco intercepted her near the logistics post, already lacing his harness. "You saw it?" he asked. "Yes," she answered. "The data's not just noise. The CO2 surge is real. It's coming from deep chambers. And the rupture? If it extends another kilometer, it'll meet the southern flow path. That means a full breach. We'll lose the south corridor." Marco didn't need more explanation. That corridor was the final supply and evacuation route for dozens of towns along the lower slopes. "We need eyes on it now," he said. "You in?" "Always," Emily replied. They joined a team of 4, 2 geologists, 1 drone pilot, and a terrain scout. Their mission was simple on paper: reach the rupture, scan the expansion zone, and assess the structural integrity of the connecting fault. But nothing was ever simple when the ground you walked on could open at any moment. The path there was slow. The team avoided main roads, which were now dangerous with surface instability, and instead followed a series of old goat trails that wound through partially burned forest and over brittle rock fields that echoed with every step. Birds were silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. They reached the rupture zone by mid-morning. The land had cracked wide like a scar splitting fresh skin. Emily crouched near the edge, her gloves brushing the warm stone, as she fed a cable camera into the abyss. The live feed flickered to life on her tablet, walls of exposed strata, glowing veins of heat, a slow exhale of vapor that shimmered like a mirage. Depth reads 42 meters, she muttered. Expanding laterally. The drone launched next, flying a wide circle above them, capturing infrared imagery and topographic overlays. Data streamed in thick and fast, too much for her eyes alone, so she flagged key anomalies and sent them to the emergency control team back at camp. One geologist called out from a slope above. "Hey, there's displacement near the ridge. Rocks lifting." Emily turned her attention to the screen just in time to see a long, dark line appear along the flank of the fault. Movement. Fresh. Fast. Dangerous. "Pull back," she shouted, waving to the team. "Everyone fall back now." They retreated as the ground behind them groaned like something alive. A thunderous crack echoed across the valley, followed by the crash of stone as a massive chunk of the ridge gave way, sliding downward in a slow-motion avalanche of debris and dust. No one was caught, but the path they'd used to arrive was now buried. They were cut off. "Alternate routes east," the scout said. "We've got maybe an hour's light left." "We don't have that," Emily snapped. "If this rupture continues to grow, that slope will collapse next. We need to warn the camp now." She grabbed the radio and relayed a brief report, flagging a high-risk alert for the corridor. "Evacuation recommendation, urgent." "Repeat, urgent." Static. Then a garbled reply. "Confirmed. Evacuation protocol initiated." Relief washed over her for a moment, but it didn't last. She turned to the team. "We move now. That ridge goes, we don't get a second chance." The east trail was narrow and steep, lined with scorched trees and unstable ash fields. They moved fast, adrenaline pushing them through every aching muscle, every burning lungful of hot air. Emily's mind raced as fast as her feet. She couldn't stop thinking of the faces back at camp, the nurses, the children, Lucia, the volunteers who didn't know yet how close danger had crept in the night. They reached the lower slope after 90 minutes of grueling descent, clothes soaked in sweat, skin streaked with soot. As they broke through the final tree line, Emily saw the line of vehicles already moving down the main evacuation road. Trucks loaded with supplies, a caravan of people guided by flashing lights and shouting voices. Marco caught up beside her, hands on his knees, breathing hard. "We made it." "Barely," she said. "But we did." They flagged a transport vehicle and jumped aboard, heading back up to the main camp to assist with the final phase of evacuation. The scene was controlled chaos, organized, but frantic. Emily helped load crates of medical gear while calling out instructions to arriving volunteers. Her voice had grown sharper since her first days here, no longer uncertain or hesitant. It carried authority now, not from rank, but from truth. She had earned it. She spotted Lucia near the main tent, her face streaked with tears but her hands steady as she helped carry a stretcher. "You got everyone?" Emily asked. Lucia nodded, voice trembling. "Almost. A few stragglers. But most are out. We'll sweep the perimeter before we go," Emily promised. "No one gets left behind." The final moments were a blur. Supplies thrown into trucks, names checked off on worn clipboards, final scans of the slope using handheld sensors. Emily walked the camp one last time, her heart aching at the thought of leaving it behind. This place had been chaos. It had been grief. It had also been healing. She paused near the table where she'd written to Rosa, the surface now cleared, her notebook gone. Someone must have packed it. She hoped it would find its way back to her. She turned toward Etna, her eyes tracing the curling plume now rising steadily from the caldera like a warning flag. The mountain wasn't finished. But neither was she. A rumble shook the ground just as she climbed into the last departing vehicle. People cried out, clinging to one another. Emily looked back one final time as fire bloomed from the crater's edge, bright, violent, alive. And in that moment, she felt something unexpected: respect. The mountain destroyed. But it also revealed. What it uncovered in her: strength, resilience, truth, was something no data set could ever quantify. As the truck rumbled down the mountain, Emily closed her eyes, the roar of Etna fading behind her, but the lessons etched deeply within her bones. And though ash still clung to her skin, and the scent of fire still filled the air, what she carried now wasn't just the weight of the mountain, it was the courage to rise above it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The ash settled slowly, like a heavy gray blanket smothering the landscape, dulling the colors of Sicily's once vibrant hills and valleys. Towns that had thrived on the slopes of Etna were now cloaked in silence, streets empty except for the soft crunch of footsteps against the dusty earth. Emergency crews moved steadily through the deserted neighborhoods, checking for damage, marking homes unsafe, and offering aid where they could. Emily stood on the edge of a small village that had been spared the worst of the lava flows but was coated in a fine layer of volcanic ash. She breathed in the heavy air, every breath gritty and thick with the scent of sulfur and smoke. The devastation was undeniable, but so was the resilience etched into the faces of the few remaining residents who had refused to leave, or who had returned as soon as it was deemed safe. She walked slowly, her boots stirring up clouds of dust, her mind replaying the eruption's chaotic hours, the roaring, the heat, the thunderous crashes as earth gave way beneath them. It was still hard to believe how close the disaster had come to swallowing everything she loved about this place. At the makeshift aid station, a group of volunteers gathered around tables laden with food and water, sharing stories and offering comfort. Emily joined them briefly, her tired eyes meeting those of a woman whose hands trembled slightly as she held a photo of her family. They were all at the church, the woman said quietly. The lava took the road before we could get them out. I don't know if they're alive. Emily swallowed hard but said nothing, only placing a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder. Later, she found herself near the main evacuation center, where families huddled under tents, clutching whatever possessions they could salvage. Children played quietly, their laughter a fragile thread weaving through the somber mood. She thought of Rosa and Lucia, of the generations before her who had faced Etna's fury with both fear and acceptance. This was the cycle of life here, a brutal reminder of nature's power but also a testament to human endurance. In the following days, teams of scientists arrived in greater numbers, bringing heavy equipment to monitor seismic activity and air quality, eager to understand what had triggered the eruption and how to better predict the next one. Emily found herself back in the field, guiding new researchers through terrain she now knew intimately, pointing out fissures and heat vents with a steady hand. But beneath the scientific rigor, she carried a growing awareness: the mountain was more than a subject to study. It was a living entity with moods and memories, capable of shaping the lives of all who lived in its shadow. One afternoon, as she sat reviewing data near a thermal vent, Marco joined her with a cup of strong Italian coffee. "You're quiet today," he observed. "Just thinking," Emily said. "About what comes next." "The mountain will settle for now," Marco replied. "But we both know it never truly rests." She nodded, eyes on the rising steam. "I've been thinking about Rosa's story. The way she lived with the fear, the silence, and the waiting. It's like we're all part of this endless cycle, passing down not just knowledge but courage. And hope," Marco added. "Yes. Hope." Their conversation was interrupted by a call from base. A team had discovered a previously unknown lava tube beneath the eastern flank, hidden beneath decades of ash and debris. The tunnel stretched for miles and might hold clues about Etna's magma chambers and eruption patterns. Emily's heart quickened. This discovery could change everything, offering a window into the mountain's hidden workings and perhaps a chance to better prepare for future disasters. As night fell, she stood outside her tent, looking up at the star-filled sky, the silhouette of Etna looming dark and majestic against the horizon. The eruption had taken much, homes, memories, and even lives, but it had also opened a new chapter. A chapter where science met humanity, where pain intertwined with healing, and where the lessons of the past could guide a safer tomorrow. In the quiet, she whispered to the mountain, a promise more than a prayer: we will listen. We will learn. And we will be ready. The road ahead was uncertain, but Emily felt ready to face it, with the mountain as both challenge and teacher. The entrance to the newly discovered lava tube yawned before them like the mouth of some ancient beast, dark and cold despite the heat that still lingered in the mountain's breath. Emily stood at the edge, helmet light illuminating the jagged rocks and the shimmering wetness of volcanic glass lining the walls. The air inside was thick with humidity and a faint sulfur smell, sharp and tangy, reminding her how alive this hidden cavern was, pulsing beneath Etna's surface. The team had prepared meticulously for this exploration: oxygen monitors, thermal imaging cameras, ropes, and hand tools. Every precaution against the unknown dangers that lurked in the underground labyrinth. Marco stood beside her, flashlight steady in his grip, his expression a mixture of excitement and wariness. "This is it," he said softly. "If we can map this tube, understand its flow, we can unlock secrets about Etna's eruption cycles." Emily nodded, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She'd faced the mountain's fury above ground, but now she was stepping into its veins, into its very core. They entered cautiously, the crunch of their boots on loose rocks echoing off the cavern walls. The path twisted and narrowed, shadows dancing as their lights cut through the darkness. Every step felt heavy, the weight of the mountain pressing in on all sides. As they moved deeper, the temperature rose noticeably, a constant reminder that molten rock still moved somewhere beneath them. The walls glimmered with mineral deposits, strange formations shaped by centuries of volcanic activity. "Look at this," one of the geologists whispered, pointing to a series of basalt columns lined neatly like cathedral pillars. "This tube must have formed during a slow, steady lava flow, an ancient heartbeat of the mountain." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. The mountain's history wasn't just in textbooks or data, it was etched in these stones, in these dark, secret places that few had ever seen. Further ahead, a low rumble vibrated through the cavern floor. Everyone froze. "Tremor," Marco said quietly. "It's a reminder that Etna isn't asleep." Emily checked the monitors strapped to her wrist. The seismic activity was low but persistent. "We need to be quick." They pressed onward, navigating narrow passages and climbing over collapsed rocks. At one point, the ceiling dipped so low that Emily had to crouch, her breath catching as the tunnel opened suddenly into a vast underground chamber. The space was surreal. Illuminated by the glow of thermal vents that spewed steam and faintly glowing gases. Pools of molten rock bubbled below, casting flickering orange light across the cavern's rough walls. "Incredible," breathed the drone pilot, sending a tiny robot to capture images from angles unreachable by humans. Emily felt an overwhelming mix of awe and respect. This chamber was a living heartbeat, a source of the mountain's power and destruction. She realized how small they were in this place, intruders into a world that predated them by millennia. They set up sensors around the chamber's perimeter, recording temperature fluctuations, gas emissions, and ground vibrations. Emily took careful notes, knowing this data could revolutionize how scientists predicted future eruptions. As the team prepared to retreat, a sharp crack echoed through the cavern, a small rockfall near the entrance. Everyone tensed. "Time to go," Marco said firmly. They moved quickly but cautiously back through the twisting tunnels, the mountain's darkness closing in behind them. Once outside, the cool air hit them like a bomb. Emily inhaled deeply, savoring the fresh breeze and the sight of the sun setting behind Etna's peak, painting the sky in hues of fiery red and orange. Back at camp, as the team debriefed, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that their journey into the lava tube was more than just scientific discovery. It was a rite of passage, a confrontation with the mountain's deepest secrets and an acknowledgement of humanity's fragile place beside such overwhelming natural forces. That night, as she lay in her tent, the mountain's distant rumblings a constant lullaby, Emily thought about Rosa's warnings, the stories of survival passed down through generations. The mountain demanded respect and understanding, and in return, it could teach them how to live with the ever-present threat of disaster. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more data, and more uncertainty. But for now, she felt a quiet determination, a resolve to face whatever Etna had in store, armed with knowledge, courage, and the unbreakable will to protect the people she had come to love. The air was thick with dust and determination as the people of the small Sicilian towns began the slow and arduous task of rebuilding their lives after Etna's eruption. Streets once lively with chatter and commerce were now lined with rubble and ash, yet the spirit of the community was unmistakable, rising like a phoenix from the grey ruins. Emily watched from the edge of the reconstruction site, a mixture of pride and sadness settling in her chest. She had come to know these towns intimately, their history intertwined with the mountain, their people hardened by generations of living in Etna's shadow. Now, they faced a future both uncertain and hopeful. Volunteers, locals, and emergency responders worked side by side, clearing debris and salvaging what they could from damaged homes. Children helped where they were able, their laughter a fragile thread weaving through the heavy air. Emily moved among them, lending support, sharing water, and listening to stories of loss and resilience. The old bakery was nearly destroyed, its stone walls blackened and cracked, but its ovens still stood. "We'll bake bread again," Luca, the bakery's owner, said firmly, wiping soot from his face. "The mountain took much, but it can't take our spirit." Nearby, a group of women gathered around a makeshift altar, lighting candles and praying for those still missing, their voices soft but unwavering. Emily found herself drawn to their quiet strength, a reminder that faith and hope often bloomed in the darkest places. The town council held meetings under tents, discussing plans to rebuild with better safety measures, earthquake-resistant structures, early warning systems, and evacuation protocols. Emily was invited to speak, sharing insights from the eruption and the lava tube exploration. "We can't control the mountain," she told them, "but we can prepare, adapt, and protect each other." Her words were met with nods and murmurs of agreement, a collective resolve forming in the face of adversity. As the days passed, Emily grew closer to the people, forging bonds that transcended language and culture. She shared meals with families, learned the local dialects' nuances, and discovered the deep-rooted traditions that defined life here. One evening, under a sky heavy with stars, she sat with Marco and Lucia beside a fire. "This place," Lucia said softly, "is more than home. It's who we are. Etna shapes us, our fears, our joys, our stories." Emily nodded, feeling the weight of those words. The mountain was both destroyer and creator, a force that demanded respect and inspired awe. Rebuilding was not just about brick and mortar, it was about restoring identity and community. A breakthrough came when a group of engineers unveiled a plan to redirect future lava flows using strategically placed barriers and channels. The idea was controversial, some feared it could anger the mountain further, but many saw it as a hopeful step toward coexistence. Emily worked closely with the engineers, translating scientific data into practical solutions. It was a delicate balance, blending ancient wisdom with modern technology. As reconstruction progressed, signs of life returned to the towns. Gardens sprouted green shoots through the ash, shops reopened their doors, and children's laughter filled the streets once more. Yet beneath the surface, memories of the eruption lingered, haunting and powerful. Emily knew the scars would remain, both visible and invisible. One afternoon, as she walked through a newly rebuilt neighborhood, she met an elderly man sitting on a bench. His eyes were sharp and steady, reflecting a lifetime of experience. "You have done much," he said. "But remember, the mountain teaches patience. It does not forgive haste. His words resonated deeply with Emily. She realized that healing was a journey without shortcuts, a process of learning to live alongside uncertainty and danger. As the first anniversary of the eruption approached, the community planned a ceremony to honor those lost and celebrate their resilience. Emily was asked to speak again, this time not as an outsider but as part of the family. Standing before a crowd gathered in the town square, she shared stories of courage, survival, and hope. Etna will erupt again, she said, but so will we. Each time, stronger, wiser, united. The crowd erupted in applause, tears mixing with smiles. Emily looked up at the mountain silhouette against the dawn, feeling a profound connection. The eruption had changed everything, but it had also revealed the unbreakable spirit of a community bound together by love and perseverance. As she stepped down from the stage, she knew this was not the end of their story, but a new beginning, forged in fire and hope. Emily sat at her cluttered desk, the glow of her laptop screen illuminating maps, seismic charts, and volcanic activity reports scattered across the surface. The mountain's unrest had not ceased. Though the major eruption was over, Etna continued to rumble beneath the earth, reminding everyone that the danger was far from past. Scientists around the world had converged in Sicily, their research becoming more urgent and intense with each passing day. Emily's discovery of the lava tube had opened new avenues for understanding the volcano's inner workings, but it also raised complex questions, questions that did not have easy answers. The dilemma weighed heavily on her. How much risk was acceptable in studying a living, breathing force of nature that could change course without warning? Her phone buzzed. Marco texting her about an unexpected increase in seismic activity near the northern flank. The data indicated magma movement deeper underground, possibly signaling another eruption in the coming weeks or months. Emily leaned back, rubbing tired eyes. The pressure to predict and prevent disaster was immense. Local officials looked to her and the scientific community for guidance, but nature was stubbornly unpredictable. Over coffee with Marco the next morning, Emily voiced her concerns. We have all this data, but can we really say when it will erupt again? What if we're wrong? Marco sipped thoughtfully. That's the hardest part. We study patterns, but Etna has a mind of its own. The best we can do is prepare and warn. Emily nodded, but her mind raced. She had spent years building her career on volcanic prediction, yet here she was facing the unknown with a new humility. The community depended on her expertise, but the mountain demanded respect, unpredictability, and caution. In the following days, the team intensified monitoring efforts, deploying drones into unstable craters, installing new sensors along fissures, and expanding their network of lava tube probes. Each discovery brought hope but also complexity. One afternoon, while analyzing gas emissions near a newly formed vent, Emily found unusual chemical signatures, indications that magma was interacting with underground water reservoirs, a dangerous combination that could trigger explosive steam eruptions. She reported the findings immediately, prompting emergency meetings among scientists and local authorities. The prospect of a sudden, violent eruption terrified the residents and weighed heavily on the decision-makers. We may need to expand evacuation zones, Emily said grimly during the briefing. Safety has to be our priority. That night, Emily wrestled with a growing ethical conflict. The mountain's mood was shifting, and warnings of imminent danger loomed large. Yet ordering widespread evacuations would uproot thousands, disrupting lives, livelihoods, and the fragile progress of rebuilding. She questioned how much disruption was justified by uncertain predictions. In her tent, surrounded by maps and data streams, Emily reflected on her own journey, the loss, the hope, the resilience she had witnessed. She thought about Rosa's stories, the generations who had lived with Etna's threat, and the delicate balance of fear and courage they had maintained. Could science alone solve this dilemma, or was there a need for deeper understanding and connection? Early the next morning, a tremor shook the camp, jolting Emily awake. The monitors confirmed it, a significant seismic event had just occurred deep beneath the mountain. Emergency sirens began to wail through the valley as officials activated evacuation protocols. Emily joined the rush to assist in coordinating the exodus, her heart pounding with urgency and responsibility. Families packed belongings, loaded vehicles, and comforted frightened children. The air buzzed with tension but also solidarity. As she directed traffic away from danger zones, Emily's eyes met those of a young boy clutching his mother's hand, wide-eyed but brave. In that moment, she understood that science was not just about data and predictions, it was about people, about community, and about hope in the face of uncertainty. The evacuation unfolded in an organized but chaotic dance, with everyone doing their part. Emily stayed on the front lines, communicating with teams, relaying updates, and reassuring anxious residents. Hours passed, and the mountain rumbled louder, its fury threatening to unleash again. Yet through the fear and turmoil, Emily felt a surge of determination. She knew that while they could not control Etna, they could stand united, armed with knowledge, compassion, and resilience. As the sun set behind the evacuated towns, Emily looked up at the glowing summit, a molten river snaking down its side, a vivid reminder of the power they faced. The dilemma remained: how to live with the mountain, how to protect those who called it home, and how to embrace both the danger and beauty of a world shaped by fire. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, and new choices. But Emily was ready to face them, grounded by the belief that science and humanity together could light the way through the darkness. The days following the evacuation were a tense blur of activity, punctuated by the constant low rumble of Etna's restless heart. Emergency centers buzzed with phone calls, reports, and last-minute preparations, but beneath the urgency was an undercurrent of uncertainty that weighed heavily on everyone. Emily found herself at the center of it all, a conduit between the mountain's language and the people who needed to understand it. The scientific instruments painted a vivid, unsettling picture: rising magma pressure, shifting seismic patterns, increased gas emissions. Each reading was a piece of a puzzle that hinted at what might come next, but the puzzle was incomplete, and the stakes were impossibly high. Walking through the command center, Emily reviewed the latest thermal images captured by drones circling above the volcano's summit. Pools of molten rock glowed brighter than before, veins of fire snaking down the slopes in dangerous, unpredictable flows. She knew this wasn't just a moment of natural fury, it was the mountain sending a message, a warning written in heat and ash. Marco approached, his brow furrowed, eyes scanning the same screens. The tremors are growing stronger. The magma chamber is expanding faster than we thought. Emily nodded, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. If it erupts again, it could be even more violent. They turned toward a map dotted with red zones, areas identified as most at risk for lava flows, ash fall, and pyroclastic surges. "We need to update the evacuation plans," Marco said. "Expand the perimeter, alert more towns." Emily hesitated. The community is still recovering. People are tired, scared. Another evacuation will be devastating. Marco's voice was firm but understanding. Safety has to come first. The tension between science and humanity, the cold data versus the warmth of home and memory, was palpable. Over the next several days, the team worked relentlessly, monitoring every tremor, every shift in gas levels, every sign the mountain offered. Emily found herself spending long hours outside near the mountain's base, observing the landscape scarred by the previous eruption. Charred trees, ash-covered fields, and blackened rocks formed a stark tableau of destruction and resilience. One afternoon, a local farmer named Antonio approached her, his weathered face etched with worry. "The animals are restless," he said quietly. "The dogs won't stop howling, and the birds have fled. Nature feels it before we do." Emily smiled softly. "Animals often sense danger earlier than humans. It's another sign we need to take seriously." Antonio nodded, his eyes reflecting the weight of generations living with Etna's moods. That evening, Emily returned to the research station, where she gathered data from ground sensors and satellite feeds. The mountain's activity was increasing steadily, with new fissures forming along its flank. The seismic waves indicated magma was pushing upwards with renewed force. As she pieced together the information, a chilling realization settled in: they were on the edge of another eruption, perhaps one that could rival or surpass the last. She convened an urgent meeting with the local authorities, emergency services, and scientific team leaders. The room was filled with tension as she presented the data. "Etna is waking again," she said. "We must act swiftly to protect lives. The evacuation zones will be expanded. All residents must prepare to leave if called upon." The announcement was met with mixed reactions, some fearful, others resigned, and a few skeptical. The mountain's unpredictable nature made planning difficult. Meanwhile, back in the villages, the people began to respond. Some packed their belongings in haste, others said prayers and shared stories, clinging to hope and tradition. Emily felt the weight of responsibility keenly, aware that the mountain's next move could change everything again. Late one night, while reviewing the latest seismic scans, her phone buzzed, a message from Marco: "New fissure forming on the northeast slope. Increased gas emissions detected." She grabbed her gear and joined him on the field. The air was thick with sulfur and heat as they approached the site, the ground vibrating beneath their feet. They watched in awe and apprehension as molten rock seeped slowly from the earth, carving new paths down the mountain. "It's alive," Marco whispered. Emily's heart pounded. The warning signs were clear now: Etna was preparing to roar once more. Returning to the base, she sent out updated alerts to emergency teams and local leaders. The mountain's voice was loud and clear. It was time to listen, and to act. The night sky over Sicily was clear and calm, a deceptive tranquility that masked the turmoil building deep within Etna's core. Emily and the scientific team monitored the mountain with tense vigilance, the glowing screens and blinking lights a stark contrast to the dark landscape outside. Suddenly, a sharp spike in seismic activity sent ripples through their equipment, an unmistakable sign that the eruption was imminent. The call came through the emergency channel: "Eruption detected. Immediate evacuation orders issued for all at-risk zones." The community had barely recovered from the last disaster, and now they faced another test of endurance and resilience. Emily felt her heart race as she coordinated with local authorities to ensure the evacuation was swift and orderly. In the villages, families scrambled to pack essentials, hurriedly securing homes and comforting frightened children. The air filled with the sounds of car engines, hurried footsteps, and distant sirens blending with an eerie, low rumble from the mountain. From the observation post, Emily watched as Etna's summit ignited with fiery bursts. Streams of lava spilled down the slopes, carving glowing rivers through the night. Ash plumes billowed upward, illuminated by the orange-red glow, casting an apocalyptic light over the landscape. "It's more intense than before," Marco said grimly. The mountain's fury was breathtaking and terrifying all at once. Emergency shelters filled quickly as residents sought refuge from the spreading ash and falling debris. Volunteers worked tirelessly, distributing masks and supplies, guiding evacuees to safety. Emily moved among them, her presence a steady anchor amid chaos. She noticed a family stranded near a roadblock, an elderly woman clutching a photo, her hands trembling. Emily knelt beside her, offering reassurance. "You're safe now. We'll get you to shelter." Outside, the air grew thick with ash, falling like snowflakes, coating everything in a gray blanket. Visibility dropped sharply, forcing emergency vehicles to slow. The mountain's roar grew louder, a relentless reminder of nature's power. In the research station, the team tracked lava flows, predicting their paths to warn communities in real time. Emily's voice crackled over the radio: "Stay alert. New fissures detected on the southern flank. Avoid all routes near the valley." The night stretched long and exhausting. As lava advanced, it consumed forests and fields, reshaping the land in molten fire. The earth trembled with every eruption pulse, a violent heartbeat echoing through the valleys. Yet amid destruction, acts of courage and kindness shone brightly. Neighbors helped one another evacuate, sharing food and blankets. Firefighters risked their lives to protect structures and assist the vulnerable. Emily felt a profound respect for the human spirit in the face of such overwhelming force. Hours later, as dawn approached, the intensity began to wane. The lava flows slowed, and the rumbling softened to a distant grumble. Exhausted but relieved, the team gathered outside to watch the first light touch Etna's scarred slopes. The mountain's wrath had carved a new chapter in its story, a reminder of nature's unpredictability and the fragile balance between destruction and renewal. Emily looked out over the landscape, feeling the weight of loss but also the spark of hope. They had survived the night of fire, but the work of healing and rebuilding was only beginning. The mountain remained restless, but so did the people. Together, they would face whatever came next. The sun rose over the scarred landscape, its light casting long shadows across fields of cooled lava and ash-covered homes. In the quiet of early morning, the devastation etched by Etna's latest eruption was stark and undeniable. Streets once familiar were transformed into alien terrain, with blackened rocks replacing gardens and roads swallowed by molten rock. Yet amid the destruction, life persisted. Residents began to emerge from shelters, their faces weary but determined. Emily walked through the affected towns, witnessing firsthand the impact of nature's fury and humanity's resilience. She saw children cautiously stepping onto playgrounds now coated in fine ash, elderly neighbors helping one another clear debris, and farmers inspecting fields that might yet yield crops. The contrast between loss and hope was palpable. The community was battered, yet unbroken. Emergency crews continued to work tirelessly, clearing roads, restoring utilities, and distributing aid. Volunteers from nearby cities arrived, bringing supplies, tools, and hands ready to help. Emily coordinated with local leaders to prioritize efforts, focusing on restoring critical infrastructure and supporting those most affected. She also met with families who had lost homes or loved ones, listening with empathy and offering support. These moments underscored the profound human cost behind the scientific data she studied daily. In the days following the eruption, Emily took time to reflect on the mountain's relentless power and the fragile balance they lived with. She thought about the lessons learned, about preparation, community strength, and respect for nature's unpredictability. One afternoon, as she stood at the edge of a cooled lava flow, she was joined by Marco. They shared a quiet moment watching new plants begin to sprout through cracks in the blackened earth. Even here, Marco said softly, life finds a way. Emily nodded, feeling a deep connection to the cycle of destruction and renewal that defined Etna and its people. Back at the research center, scientists analyzed data collected during the eruption, seeking insights to improve future predictions and safety measures. Emily contributed her field observations, helping to bridge the gap between laboratory findings and real-world impacts. The collaboration felt more vital than ever, a collective effort to understand and coexist with a force beyond control. In the midst of recovery, community leaders organized gatherings to honor those lost and to celebrate the resilience that had carried them through the crisis. Emily was invited to speak, sharing both scientific perspectives and heartfelt reflections. She emphasized the importance of hope, preparedness, and solidarity. Etna will continue to shape our lives, she told the crowd, but together, we can face whatever comes. The ceremony was filled with tears, prayers, and quiet determination, a collective acknowledgement of pain and strength. Emily left with a renewed sense of purpose, committed to supporting the community in their ongoing journey. As weeks turned into months, rebuilding progressed slowly but steadily. Homes were reconstructed with improved safety features, and new monitoring systems were installed throughout the region. Education programs were launched to teach residents about volcanic hazards and emergency responses. The partnership between scientists and the community deepened, fostering trust and shared responsibility. Emily's work evolved from crisis response to long-term resilience planning. She began documenting the eruption and recovery in a series of articles and talks, hoping to spread awareness and preparedness beyond Sicily. One evening, as she reviewed her notes, she received a message from Rosa, an invitation to visit her family's vineyard. Emily accepted, eager to reconnect with the roots of this land and its people. At the vineyard, surrounded by rolling hills and budding grapevines, Emily felt a sense of peace. Rosa shared stories of past eruptions and the generations who had weathered them, passing down wisdom and strength. Emily realized that living with Etna was not just about science or survival, it was about embracing a shared history and identity. The mountain was a constant presence, sometimes fierce, sometimes nurturing, but always shaping the lives around it. As the sun set over the vineyard, Emily reflected on how much she had learned, how deeply she had been changed. The eruption had been a trial by fire, but also a teacher. She understood now that respect for nature, compassion for others, and the courage to adapt were the true foundations of resilience. The road ahead would not be easy, but with community and science united, the people of Etna's shadow were ready to face it together. The first signs of spring brought a quiet promise to the towns battered by Etna's recent fury. Slowly but surely, life began to return. Streets once deserted and lined with ash-filled rubble now saw the steady flow of cars and pedestrians, hopeful steps towards normalcy. Emily stood on the veranda of the small apartment she was renting in Nicolosi, gazing out at the mountain silhouette, still smoldering but less threatening now under the pale morning sun. The scars on Etna's slopes remained, vivid and raw, but so did the resilience of the people who called this land home. Across the valley, rebuilding efforts were underway. Construction crews worked tirelessly to repair homes and infrastructure, employing new techniques designed to withstand future eruptions. Local businesses, devastated by the disaster, reopened their doors, cafes, markets, and artisan shops once again alive with chatter and activity. Emily had become more than just a scientist, she was a community member, a trusted advisor, and a witness to their recovery. One afternoon, she joined Rosa at the vineyard, where green shoots poked through the rich soil. The vineyard had been damaged by ash and heat, but the family was optimistic. Rosa wiped soot from a leaf, smiling. This earth gives and takes, but it also heals. Emily nodded, feeling a surge of hope. The bond between the land and its people was unbreakable. Rebuilding was not only physical but emotional and social. Support groups formed, bringing together those who had lost everything to share stories, grieve, and find strength in one another. Emily often attended, listening to tales of courage, sacrifice, and unwavering spirit. She realized that these human connections were just as vital as scientific advances in forging resilience. Meanwhile, the scientific team worked to refine monitoring systems, installing advanced sensors and expanding early warning networks. Emily collaborated with engineers and emergency planners to design evacuation routes and community drills, blending technology with local knowledge. Schools incorporated volcanic education into their curriculum, empowering the younger generation with understanding and preparedness. The future was still uncertain, Etna's heartbeat remained unpredictable, but the community's readiness grew stronger each day. Emily also began working with government officials to secure funding for long-term recovery and disaster mitigation projects. She advocated for policies that balanced development with environmental protection, emphasizing the importance of living sustainably alongside the mountain. It was a delicate dance, preserving heritage and progress while respecting nature's power. One evening, Emily attended a town meeting where residents voiced their hopes and fears. Some wanted to rebuild quickly, others urged caution. Heated debate sparked, but beneath the surface was a shared desire for safety and stability. Emily spoke about the science, but also about patience and collaboration. Rebuilding is more than bricks and mortar, she said. It's about rebuilding trust, in each other and in the land. Her words resonated, bridging gaps and inspiring cooperation. As months passed, small victories marked the path forward. Schools reopened, children returned to play in safer parks, and local artists created murals celebrating the community's journey. Festivals once cancelled were now planned, symbols of life and joy returning. Emily felt a deep gratitude for the chance to be part of this story, one of survival, transformation, and hope. Yet, she never forgot the mountain's presence, a constant reminder of both danger and beauty. One clear morning, she joined a hike to Etna's summit with Marco and several local guides. As they climbed, the landscape unfolded beneath them, vast lava fields, steaming vents, and breathtaking vistas. At the peak, Emily paused to absorb the panorama, the mountain's raw power humbling her. Marco broke the silence. Etna is part of us. We learn from it, respect it, and live with it. Emily smiled, feeling a profound connection. The eruption had changed everything, but it had also revealed the strength and spirit that defined this place. As they descended, Emily knew their work was far from over. The mountain's story was ongoing, and so was theirs. Together, they would face whatever came next, with knowledge, courage, and an unyielding hope. Life around Mount Etna was settling into a new rhythm, one defined by vigilance, respect, and adaptation. The eruption's aftermath had rewritten the landscape, but it had also rewritten the community's relationship with the mountain. Emily found herself immersed not only in scientific research but also in the everyday lives of the people who had endured so much. The once familiar routines were now punctuated by drills and early warnings, a reminder that Etna's restless heart could stir again at any moment. Yet beneath the cautious atmosphere was a remarkable resilience. Families rebuilt homes with reinforced structures designed to withstand ashfall and tremors. Schools taught children not only about science but about the stories and traditions tied to Etna's presence. Emily often visited these classrooms, sharing her knowledge and learning in return, stories of ancestors who had lived through eruptions centuries ago, legends passed down with reverence. In the local markets and cafes, conversations frequently returned to the mountain. It was both a source of fear and pride, destruction and fertility. Farmers like Antonio spoke of the rich volcanic soil that, despite its dangers, yielded some of the region's best crops. This paradox was part of what made life here so compelling. Emily's research also took on new dimensions. She worked closely with geologists, engineers, and urban planners to develop smarter infrastructure and emergency systems. They mapped lava flow paths, designed shelters, and improved communication networks. Technology played a key role, but so did community involvement. Residents were invited to participate in workshops, sharing their experiences and helping shape the plans that would protect them in the future. This collaborative approach strengthened bonds and fostered a shared sense of responsibility. One evening, Emily attended a storytelling event held in the town square. Elderly residents recounted their memories of past eruptions, the fear, the loss, but also the miraculous moments of survival and unity. Younger generations listened intently, absorbing lessons that connected past to present. Emily was struck by how the mountain's history was woven into the very fabric of community identity. As months passed, the physical scars left by Etna's eruption slowly softened. New vegetation sprouted across blackened fields, and wildlife cautiously returned. The land began its long process of healing. Emily often hiked the mountain trails, witnessing this transformation firsthand. One afternoon, she joined Marco and Rosa for a picnic near a newly formed lava cave. The conversation turned reflective. "This eruption changed us," Rosa said quietly. "But it also showed us what we're capable of." Marco nodded. "We've learned to live with the mountain's mood swings. It's part of who we are." Emily felt a deep sense of belonging. Her journey, once driven by scientific curiosity, had become a personal mission, to help this community thrive in harmony with the volcano that defined their lives. However, the new normal was not without challenges. The constant threat of eruption weighed on everyone, a reminder of nature's unpredictability. Some residents struggled with lingering trauma, while others worried about the economic impact of rebuilding and uncertainty. Emily supported mental health initiatives and community programs aimed at healing these invisible wounds. She understood that resilience was as much emotional as it was physical. As she prepared reports and proposals for ongoing monitoring and disaster preparedness, Emily reflected on how much had changed since the first eruption. The mountain's fury had tested their limits, but it had also sparked innovation, cooperation, and hope. She thought about the curious question she had posed at the beginning of her journey: what if you suddenly lost everything and had no one by your side? Here, surrounded by a community that had lost much yet stood together, she found the answer. It was the human spirit, the will to rebuild, to connect, and to persevere, that pushed people forward. The mountain would always be a powerful force, but so was the people who lived in its shadow. That evening, as the sun set behind Etna's silhouette, Emily stood on her balcony, watching smoke rise gently from the summit's vents. The sky was painted with hues of orange and purple, a breathtaking reminder of both endings and beginnings. She felt a quiet peace. Life on the slopes of Etna was forever changed, but it was alive, vibrant, and full of promise. The new normal was not just survival, it was a renewed way of living, shaped by the mountain and the people who called it home. The weeks following the eruption allowed the community and scientists alike to digest what had happened and begin planning for the future. Emily spent long hours compiling data, cross-referencing satellite images with on-the-ground reports, and analyzing the patterns that had led to Etna's violent awakening. The mountain had spoken with a force that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring, a reminder that despite all humanity's advances, nature remained a powerful and unpredictable force. One of the most significant lessons emerged from the eruption's unpredictability. Though scientists had anticipated increased activity, the precise timing and intensity had surprised many. This underscored the need for continued investment in research and technology. Emily worked closely with a new international task force, sharing findings and learning from other volcanic regions around the world. This global collaboration was a beacon of hope, science transcending borders to protect lives. Meanwhile, the local community absorbed its own lessons, hard-earned and deeply felt. Town meetings and public forums became regular events, places where residents could voice concerns, share experiences, and contribute ideas. Emily was often invited to speak, but she also learned from the people's wisdom. Older generations shared stories of past eruptions, explaining how their ancestors had adapted and rebuilt. These narratives enriched the scientific understanding with cultural depth, a blend of tradition and innovation. Schools integrated volcanic science into their programs, using the recent eruption as a living classroom. Students engaged with the topic not just academically but personally, many having experienced the disaster firsthand. Emily visited classrooms frequently, encouraging curiosity and resilience. She saw in these young faces a future shaped by knowledge and respect for the land they inhabited. On the practical side, emergency response plans were overhauled. Evacuation routes were clearly marked and regularly practiced. Communication systems were improved to ensure rapid dissemination of warnings, even in remote areas. Community emergency teams were trained and equipped, turning residents into first responders who could act quickly and effectively. The landscape itself offered lessons. The paths of lava flows were studied carefully, helping to identify high-risk zones for future eruptions. Urban planners used this information to guide rebuilding efforts, steering development away from vulnerable areas and promoting safer building practices. One striking discovery was how quickly certain plants began to recolonize the ash-covered fields. Botanists joined the research, studying the mountain's natural recovery and exploring ways to assist reforestation and soil stabilization. This ecological perspective added another layer to the overall recovery strategy. Emily also focused on mental health, recognizing that the trauma of the eruption was not confined to physical losses. She supported programs offering counseling and community support, emphasizing that healing involved both body and mind. The stories she heard were profound, of fear, loss, but also courage and hope. She understood that resilience was a mosaic of many parts, including emotional strength. Throughout this process, Emily maintained a close relationship with Marco and Rosa, whose family vineyard symbolized the ongoing connection between people and the land. Together, they organized workshops blending scientific knowledge with traditional practices, fostering a holistic approach to living with Etna. The vineyard became a hub for education and community gatherings, a place where past, present, and future converged. The eruption had tested them all, but it had also galvanized a collective commitment to adapt and protect. One evening, as Emily prepared a lecture for an international conference, she paused to reflect on the journey. The mountain's eruption had been a cataclysmic event, but it had also sparked transformation. From destruction had come innovation, solidarity, and renewed respect for nature's power. The lessons from the ash were clear: vigilance must never waver, science must continue to advance, and communities must stand united. Emily knew the path ahead would require constant effort and humility. Etna's next eruption was not a question of if, but when. But armed with knowledge, compassion, and hope, the people of Sicily were ready. As she looked out over the glowing vents of the mountain at twilight, Emily felt a profound gratitude for being part of this story, a story of nature's fury, human resilience, and the enduring bond between them both. The eruption was no longer just an event etched in memory, it had become a defining chapter in the lives of everyone living around Etna. Months had passed, seasons shifted, and yet the mountain's presence remained a constant, a silent guardian and sometimes a fierce reminder of nature's power. Emily stood once again on the edge of the mountain's caldera, the crisp air filled with the faint scent of sulfur and the distant rumble of subterranean activity. It was a place of contrasts, breathtaking beauty and latent danger coexisting in uneasy harmony. Since the eruption, life had taken on a new rhythm. The community had transformed grief into action, fear into preparation, and loss into hope. Children played beneath skies once darkened by ash, vineyards bloomed where lava once flowed, families rebuilt homes stronger than before. Yet beneath these signs of recovery was a deeper lesson, one about humility, respect, and the enduring strength of human spirit. Emily's journey had evolved alongside this transformation. From a scientist driven by curiosity, she had become a storyteller, advocate, and witness to resilience. She traveled frequently, sharing her experiences with global audiences and emphasizing the importance of community-centered disaster response. Her talks often began with the same question that sparked her own journey: what if you suddenly lost everything and had no one by your side? The answer, she told listeners, was found in the bonds we build, the knowledge we share, and the hope we carry forward. Back in Sicily, the bonds between residents and the mountain had deepened. Marco and Rosa's vineyard thrived, a symbol of renewal and harmony with the land. They hosted visitors eager to learn about living with Etna, blending science with tradition in tours and workshops. The community's collective memory of the eruption was preserved through stories, art, and education, an ever-present reminder and a guide for the future. Emergency systems were in place and regularly tested, ensuring that warnings would reach everyone quickly. The government invested in research and infrastructure, recognizing the mountain's ongoing threat and potential. Emily's role had expanded to advising on policy, bridging the gap between science and governance. Yet despite these advances, the mountain's mystery remained. Etna's next eruption was inevitable, a cycle of destruction and creation woven into the fabric of this land. Emily often thought about this paradox: the beauty born from fire, the growth sparked by devastation. It was a lesson not only for Sicily but for anyone facing adversity. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the peaks, Emily sat with Marco and Rosa beneath a canopy of stars. The air was cool, the silence comforting. "We live with Etna, not just beside it," Rosa said softly. "It shapes us, teaches us, challenges us." Emily smiled, feeling the truth of those words. Life after the fire was not simply about rebuilding what was lost, it was about embracing change, learning from nature's power, and moving forward together. As they talked, the distant glow of the mountain's vents illuminated the night sky. A reminder of both the threat and the promise that lay within. Emily knew their story was far from over. But for now, there was peace in knowing that no matter what came next, the people of Etna's shadow were ready. Life after the fire was life lived fully, with courage, wisdom, and hope lighting the way. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?